battle of the War of Independence is the Battle of Bunker Hill, June 17th, 1775. Now, I want to go back so that you all understand that at the Second Continental Congress in Philadelphia, the fighting is going to be happening throughout the 13 colonies, with the majority of it in the beginning in the northern colonies. But the Continental Congress, which is in Philadelphia, is going to be constantly in session. So it doesn't dismiss. I mean, this Continental Congress is in session way until an actual new government is formed for the new United States of America. And that's not really going to happen until the 1780s. So when I say that the Second Continental Congress is in a long session, it is in a very long session. And there's a lot of things that it is going to be doing while people are fighting the war. So before even the Battle of Bunker Hill, you had the Olive Branch Petition. You are going to have the Continental Army formed. And along with the Continental Army being formed, you have George Washington, who is appointed commander-in-chief, nominated by John Adams. That is crucial. That is crucial that they appoint George Washington. And we're going to talk about that in a little bit. But he really, in many ways, is the right man for the right job. And we'll talk about that. Another thing that we're going to see is that while all this is happening, the Olive Branch Petition, organizing the Continental Army and appointing Washington, the Continental Congress is also putting together a committee to negotiate with foreign countries. They are talking to foreign countries for perhaps help. Not yet help necessarily in a war of independence, but help in any form and in any way. We're going to see that they're going to issue paper money. And it isn't until 1776 that the Continental Congress, first of all, will even begin to think about independence and then declare independence. And what they do actually, even before they declare independence, is they are going to put together a committee to investigate and write this Declaration of Independence. It's called the Committee of Five. And this Committee of Five will investigate how they can present their case to the American colonists and to the world. And it will be left to Thomas Jefferson to actually write it. So let's see a little bit more of what's happening in these first five major things that the Continental Congress does. But they're not the only five things that they are doing. There's going to be some other things that we'll be talking about in conjunction with these major five. In July of 1775, one of the first things that we see is that the Second Continental Congress is still, it is divided between the radicals that want independence, the more conservatives, the moderates that are understanding that we are at a crossroads, but they don't want to declare independence yet. They want to see if they can negotiate, if they can work this out, if they can figure something out with England. So in July 1775, we kind of say that the moderates, they kind of have more of the ear of the Continental Congress. They are a little bit stronger in numbers. And we see that because one of the first things coming out of the Continental Congress is the Olive Branch Petition. And think olive branch, that's a symbol of peace. The Olive Branch Petition is a formal petition written out, and that it is going directly to the king. Not to Parliament, to the king, King George III. In this petition, the colonists declare their loyalty to the king. They also go on to explain that their grievance isn't with the king, and their grievance isn't with England. Their grievance is with Parliament. The Parliament is evil, that they have been, in essence, asking for representation, and Parliament doesn't give it to them. Parliament doesn't have the authority, they say, to tax them because they have no representation. And so they're appealing to the king kind of as the authority to help them. They also insist to King George in this petition that the military, this continental army that they have, I shouldn't say contracted, that they have organized, is not an army to fight for independence. It is an army to protect themselves from the troops that Parliament has placed on their lands. Well, I think I mentioned in last Thursday that King George III, his reaction is just mad. He hates it. He tears it up. And actually, the news of Bunker Hill arrives pretty much at the same time as he gets the olive branch petition, and he's just phooey. I'm not going to accept this. And he actually declares that the colonists are in open rebellion. So that's very big. He will close the colonies to all trade. American ships that are sailing are to be seized, or to be boarded and seized. This is what we call the Prohibitory Act of 1775. Passed that December, it basically says the American ports, are closed to all trade. Trade with the British, trade with the French, trade with anybody. They are closed. The American colonists beg for pardon. That's kind of King George's probable part to this. They will not trade with anyone. And all American ships sailing are to be seized. There are some other responses that the British are putting together along with this Prohibitory Act. Lord North is hiring already and preparing mercenaries. Again, going to the Hessians, also in a part of Germany, so they're called the German Hessian mercenaries. And in Virginia, something that a lot of people don't realize, but the British are instigating. They are initiating slave rebellions in Virginia. Why? To distract the colonists. Now, very important, we take a brief look to the organization, or the organizing, I should say, of the Continental Army, and the very important choice of George Washington as commander-in-chief. There is a portrait of George Washington in his Continental blues, that is the Continental Army's uniform, blue, navy blue. Who was George Washington? Washington was definitely, when he was appointed commander-in-chief, part of the Virginia elite. He was born in 1732, an Englishman. I want you all to be very aware. Benjamin Franklin, Thomas Jefferson, John Hancock, the president of the Continental Army, John Adams, Alexander Hamilton too. All of these men, our founding fathers, were all born Englishmen. Anyhow, George Washington was part of the Virginia elite. He had been a young man who had served in the British Army. We talked about him in the French and Indian War. He had served with distinction. He was very much respected with a very good military mind. And he was now married into a very, very wealthy plantation family. His wife, Martha, was a widow, and he married her. She was a little bit older than him. Not quite the scandal. No, not really. But he had married into a very prominent family. He was somebody that was very much respected for not only his military background, but for his moderation. He is somebody that thinks about things. He is somebody that doesn't rush into things. Even on the battlefield, he is somebody that also realized that perhaps he wasn't the brightest person in the room, but he very quickly realized, I will surround myself with the best generals, with the best advisors that I can, so that I can make the best choice. And this is something that we will see throughout Washington's career. He was a very important choice as the commander-in-chief of this new Continental Army, so that it can have respect not only from foreign countries, but from the rest of all the American colonists, because one, he has bona fide real military experience and he knows how the English operate. He was an English soldier, an English officer. He is what we call a moderate patriot in the beginning. And what we mean is that he is somebody that definitely is a patriot. He believes in the causes of the colonies, but he is somebody that says, let's look at what's happening. Let's think about things. Let's not rush into things. But if independence is where we're going, if fighting is what we need, then let's do it. He is very thoughtful. He is from Virginia, and this is very important because Virginia is the first colony. It is a very important colony. It is one of the largest colonies in population as well as in land. And to have that influence of Virginia, you not have only have the Virginia influence on southern colonies, but in the middle colonies as well. And so it is very important that Virginia is very much part of this movement. And very important to note that he is recommended by John Adams. John Adams, the lawyer from Boston, definitely probably one of the leaders of the more radical faction of the Patriots, the one that went to go and declare independence immediately. And he is looking down to his Virginia colony and saying, this is the man. This is the man we need to have in front of our Continental Army. He is not rash. He's not going to put our men in danger just because he's a hothead. He is somebody that looks, he understands discipline and training. He understands what he's up against. The third thing that we need to talk about, I did want to mention as I get into this, another real important thing about George Washington as commander-in-chief. He really trains his men over and over and over to the chagrin, actually, of many in the Continental Congress. But another thing that Washington will rely on, he will rely on guerrilla warfare, but he will also rely, he's very open to that, but he will also rely on something that is very ingenious, an incredible spy network, especially a very big spy network in the New York area, so that he can actually get always the news of what's going on with the British troops. The third thing we see the Continental Army doing is called the Committee of Secret Correspondence, which is an active duty between 1775 to 1776 and renamed in 1777 as the Committee of Foreign Affairs. And so basically, what is this Committee of Secret Correspondence, later Foreign Affairs? It is a committee that is negotiating with foreign governments. Its actual formation in the Continental Congress says resolve. The sole purpose of the Committee of Secret Correspondence is for corresponding with our friends in Great Britain and other parts of the world. And notice it says Great Britain, because part of the focus was to increase awareness among people they might feel would be their allies in Great Britain. But the real focus was other parts of the world, foreign alliances, getting help from foreign governments like France and Spain, the enemies of Great Britain. Also, the Committee of Foreign Affairs later will be very much involved in foreign intelligence activities and American propaganda campaigns. So they will be actively involved in foreign soil, trying to find out what's going on, who's supporting England, can I get some more intelligence from these foreign governments, as well as promoting, and some people might say actively, putting a very good spin on what's happening with the Americans down in the old colonies. The original members are Benjamin Franklin, who was considered the head of this committee, John Jay, who will go on to become one of our first Chief Justice on the Supreme Court, Roger Morris and John Dickinson, that will be very important later. We'll talk about them in another committee, and Benjamin Harrison and Thomas Johnson, all of them considered founding fathers. The fourth thing we see the Continental Congress doing is printing money. Now, when I say printing money, it isn't like they're printing a bunch of dollars and that, like today, and that it's based on something we have in the U.S. Treasury. Um, what they're going to do is print over $2 million worth of paper money, so to speak. They were called Continentals, and they'll be printing them, I should say, during the 1775 period and throughout the war. And what these paper dollars said was really not that they were worth something. It was just kind of more of a what they call a promissory note. It's like a promise of future payment, a promise that there will be a future tax that will get you the real value of this dollar. Well, to be quite honest, these Continentals depreciated quickly. They pretty much weren't even worth the amount of paper that was spent on them. And they came in really odd denominations, like 1/6 of a dollar. Another denomination might be $80. It was quite confusing. And to make things even more confusing, there was an active campaign from the English to make counterfeits of the Continentals so that it would further depreciate the value of these continental dollars. George Washington was quoted as, "A wagon load of currency will hardly purchase a wagon load of provisions." So it wasn't like they were worth a lot, but the reason they were trying to do this was trying to kind of have one kind of uniting promissory value, because many of the colonies would produce their own monies, their own paper monies, and they couldn't really be using English money. So it was just a way of trying to legitimize and make things easier for payment, but it really ended up being very chaotic because they ended up being worth nothing. And then the English were even further kind of underhandedly really depreciating their value because they would make counterfeits. Interestingly enough, today, if you were to find an old Continental, as they are called, it would be worth quite a lot of money because they are rare. Now, declare independence. That's the big question. That's been the big question since they or the two factions, the radicals and the more moderates. And in the beginning, you can say the moderates are winning because the moderates are, able to get their olive branch petition out there. But as the months progress, and they hear more and more of the Continental Army fighting, they hear more and more of what the British are doing against them, the Prohibitory Act. Remember, it's passed in December of 75. The radical faction in the Continental Congress is growing in number, growing in support. It's becoming, to many, not only in the Continental Congress, but throughout the 13 colonies, and I say colonies with quotes, that it's really just common sense to declare independence. Thomas Paine, an Englishman who is now in the colonies, wrote an essay, I guess you could call it, or a pamphlet with a very insightful essay. It became a bestseller in the colonies during this period. They sold about 120,000 copies in just 3 months. And this is way before social media and Amazon Prime and all this kind of stuff. This was a huge bestseller across the colonies. Many of the people were reading it. And it's an interesting, insightful analysis of what's happening. But he writes it really in a way that everybody understands it, not just the founding fathers or the educated elite. I mean, this is something that we're seeing being read across the colonies. And what he goes on to say is that when you look at the colonies, when you look at the Americans, they are different. They've been different. And they're not the same as their English countrymen that are in England. They act, are culturally different. But even more so, he says, aren't they already fighting for independence? Hasn't blood already been slain? Have they not already been acting as if they had declared independence. Aren't they already their own America, their own subjects? And he goes on to say it really is the king to blame because the king did not do anything to help them. And his conclusion is that it is only common sense to declare independence because it's already there. It's already obvious. They are already independent. They just need, and they're already fighting for it. They just need to declare it. It's just common sense. A quote from Common Sense, which is what his essay is called: everything that is right or reasonable pleads for separation. The blood of the slain, the weeping voice of nature cries, 'tis time to part. It's time to declare independence. Common Sense shows the power of the pen. This little document, this little essay that became an instant bestseller in many ways, was more influential to the independence movement than even the skirmishes of Lexington and Concord, than even all the resolves that the colonial assembly houses had passed. Because this really, as people read it, understood it, and it became something that they identified with. It's very important that you all realize the power of the pen. In many ways, we can say the power of the pen. It's very similar to saying the power of the media. It influences. For good or for bad, it influences. And we see it early on with this essay by Thomas Paine. We will have another similar thing happen when we're on the road to the Civil War. A book, a story called Uncle Tom's Cabin will influence more people in the northern states that slavery was bad than perhaps even all the abolitionist groups together in the North. The power of the pen. But back at the Second Continental Congress, as more and more people are reading this Common Sense, the Continental Congress keeps on getting the official news of the fighting of the Continental Army in New England, in the New York areas, and they're not getting good news. They hear of battles that the Continental Army is losing. They hear that George Washington is kind of always seems to be going backwards, not engaging so much as actually giving up more and more land in his area. And although every now and then, like around the Boston area in early 1776, they hear some good news, it's never really that permanent. But yet, there is increasing support within the Congress and throughout the colonies to simply declare the independence. Most people, as the essay said, felt they were already doing it. They were already fighting it. But understand the predicament of these representatives at our Second Continental Congress. If they declare this, they and all those that support them are committing treason. They are doing something that has really never been done. They will declare before the Declaration of Independence that American privateers start attacking British ships. So we can say this is a sixth thing. Another thing that the Continental Congress does, and along with having the privateers attack British ships, they open up American ports. But another very important thing, and this is where I say this is kind of the sixth thing, is that they make an urgent plea to all the colonial assemblies. This urgent plea is for these colonial assemblies to write new constitutions, to establish new governments, not colonial governments, but state governments. We see the actual resolve for independence in 1776. Richard Henry Lee of Virginia is the man that will pass the resolve that now introduces it into the actual Continental Congress. He was from Virginia. He was a kinsman of Thomas Jefferson, a very, very respected man from Virginia. And he resolves for independence. The Second Continental Congress will then put together a committee of 5. This committee of 5 was to investigate how to declare independence, how to actually, oh, Martin, excuse us, guys. They have to investigate how to make independence something that will be supported by all in the colonies and something that will be supported by all the foreign governments. Who is on this committee of 5? Benjamin Franklin from Pennsylvania. John Adams, one of the biggest advocates for independence from Massachusetts. Roger Sherman, who had been on the committee of what they want to accomplish. And what is it that they want to accomplish? They want to show that their revolution